Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Alcatraz. For the years between 1934 to 1963, the Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary was open, operating, and said to house some of the worst and most ruthless prisoners in all of America. Situated in San Francisco Bay, just 1.25 miles from the mainland, Alcatraz Island became home to those in the prison as well as to the guards and their families who also lived on the island. Those who applied for jobs at the penitentiary would have to move there if they got it. Former resident Chuck Stucker explained that life on Alcatraz was similar to those who grew up on a military base. He further explained that, quote, there was a preschool on the island, a small commissary with milk, butter, bread, a post office. My dad had the first color TV on the island, and it was a real popular thing for the adults. Most evenings you were either at someone's house for dinner or they were at yours. On the other hand, however, not everything can be exactly like it is everywhere else. He went on to say, quote, for the older kids, our school bus was the boat that took us to the mainland. School administrators, they were aware of the fear that we could be held hostage to try and get an inmate off the island, so we had small dog tags. IDs that had our names in association with Alcatraz. You wore it with a small metal chain. Aside from that, Chuck remembers life on the island extremely pleasantly, with a specific mention to the gorgeous views he and his family had from their home. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Lutz family. Many of us are familiar with the Amityville horror house, but if you're not, basically it was a home that was built in 1927 by a young couple, John and Catherine Moynihan. They and their families lived there until 1965, when they then sold it to the DeFeos. Unfortunately, the fate this family met in the house was a horrific one, with a member of the family taking the lives of the rest. Less than a year after that terrible night, the house was relisted and on the market, and it was sitting at a low $80,000. The house was beautiful, it was big, and the Lutz family just couldn't turn down an offer like that. Despite the family knowing about the history of the house prior to their moving in, they still chose to. They got the home cleansed as soon as they moved in. They even hired a priest to do it for them, but it just wasn't enough, because after just 28 days they needed to leave after claiming to be terrorized by some sort of paranormal activity that was going on in the house. They said that they could hear banging on the walls, one of the family members was starting to hear voices, and the doors would all slam and shut on their own. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Lykov family. In 1936, a Russian family of 4 was fleeing religious persecution, and to do so, they fled into the Siberian wilderness. They took with them a few possessions and some seeds and retreated into the forest. Here they would build a series of primitive huts as they traveled through until they reached a spot they found habitable, which was near the Mongolian border. They had no contact with the outside world and managed to be completely self-sufficient. When they originally fled into the wilderness, the family consisted of a husband and wife and their 2 children, and while out here in their new home, the couple had 2 more children, making them a family of 6. They spent their days hunting, trapping, and farming, and each year they saved their seeds in order to replant when the next season came around. One of the possessions they brought with them was a crude spinning wheel, which allowed them to turn hemp into fiber for their clothing. They ate a lot of potato patties that were mixed with hemp seeds and ground rye, and they lived like this for almost 50 years. They grew as much food as the land would allow, and they rationed carefully, but each year they grew closer and closer to starvation. As they grew closer to starving, they held a council meeting where they discussed whether or not they should save their seeds to replant or eat them all. Each year they ultimately decided to save their seeds, and one winter this cost the mother her life, which she sacrificed for her children. Until a geology team in 1978 found their home, the 2 youngest children had never even met a person outside of their family. While most of the family has since passed away, one member, the youngest daughter, as of 2019, still lives in this isolated location, where she has built herself quite a decent hut and has a herd of goats and a coop of chickens. In our number 7 spot today, we have the treehouse. Okay, this one is probably one of the least spooky on this list. It's more just unique, we'll call it. A family located in Hertfordshire, England has chosen to make their home in a custom-made treehouse that is located in the middle of the forest. I can't tell whether I love or hate this idea. The home consists of 2 separate lofts that are separated by rope bridges that weave through the trees. There's a main loft that has the things like the kitchen and the bathroom, and to exit the house there's either a ladder or a zip line that'll take you 70 meters down through thick brush and drop you right on a hiking trail. I'm not gonna lie, it looks pretty nice and it wouldn't be too bad to wake up to the sounds of nature every day, but I'm just wondering what the bugs are like up there, and I'm wondering what happens if something breaks. You know, I'm curious about sustainability in the long term. It's kind of like a fairy tale, which I love, but I have some practicality questions. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Heinzen family. If you're one of the many people who like to mindlessly scroll through TikTok, you might have come across the page of Madison Heinzen and her Rhode Island home. What's so special about this house? Well, it's the one featured in The Conjuring. Madison's parents bought the home in 2019, and she has since documented her paranormal experiences within the home. She even claims to have seen a ghost, saying, quote, "This happened last year when I was in the kitchen. I was eating dinner by myself and I saw someone run by me. I caught it by the left corner of my eye, and all I saw was a veil and a skirt, and it just vanished into thin air. This had all happened in a span of 3 seconds, and I just sat there in complete disbelief, not knowing what to do afterwards." The reason the parents bought this home, despite its very obvious and apparent paranormal history, is because they are in fact paranormal investigators, so I guess that makes a little bit more sense. In our number 5 spot today, we have the remote island. UK couple Boris and Karen von Engelbrechten decided to leave their regular lives behind and move them and their families to the tiny remote island of Fofo, which takes about 3 days to get to. The couple had previously lived in New Zealand for a while, but they decided to make the move in order to have some space from the rest of the world. I guess this place really isn't unsettling, it's just really remote, but I'm sure it's absolutely breathtaking. Upon their arrival, the couple worked with locals to help build a beachside property using materials from the island. The rainwater that falls on the island is piped in as drinking water, and the couple says they are about 60% self-sufficient as they grow their own fruits and veggies, and then they supplement that with a trip every 3 weeks to the nearest large island to get some canned food. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Ashley family. This is a family that are the only ones who live anywhere along the 400-kilometer length of the Nowitna River in Alaska. The family has been living here for the last 18 years, despite the location being 160 kilometers from the nearest town. Once a year, the family will travel to do a massive grocery shop for cans of produce and evaporated milk, tomato paste, rice, beans, sugar, you know, those sorts of things. But aside from this food that they buy, the family lives off of the land, hunting black bears, wolves, rabbits, ducks, and beavers, and they make jam out of rose hips and berries. The family keeps track of time in their own way, changing their clocks based on the sun and daylight hours and what season it is. They also use solar power in order to power their home. While the transition into this remote lifestyle was a little worrisome at first, the isolation is now something they embrace. They say, quote, "People want to know what 18 years of isolation does to you. It changes you. You have time to have more than 2 thoughts on any one subject. We spend months talking about just one subject because we have time to." In our number 3 spot today, we have the isolated island. For 30 years, this family has been living alone on an island in the middle of a lake in southern Dong Nay province in Vietnam. This 4-hectare island is home to Nguyen Van Long and his family, and it became their home in the 1980s when he and his wife decided to leave their hometown and move to start a new life. They began to earn a living by sawing down trees, and they then later switched to growing corn and beans and rice. When they moved here, this place actually wasn't an island at first, but became one when the lake was created. From here, the growing of the crops got more difficult. Despite the isolation and the lack of electricity, the family stays here because they explain that life would be more difficult if they moved to another place without any money. The family studied the new island soil and realized that growing cashews might be their best source of income, which it now is. In the end, he said that he is now used to living on the island and enjoys it there since it has fresh air and is away from the hustle and bustle. He goes on to explain that their children are grown now, and now that they have their own lives, he and his wife want to stay on the island forever. In our number 2 spot today, we have the bunker. This is one of the most insane and truly messed up stories I've ever heard, and I don't know where to begin. Basically, in a remote village in the Netherlands, a few years ago it was discovered that there was a family of 8 that was living in a bunker for 9 years, awaiting what they said to be the end of time. Basically, this family group consisted of a father, 6 adults who he claimed to be his children, and then another adult tenant. The oldest child managed to escape the bunker, and he headed to a local bar where he told the owner what he had just experienced and explained that he and his siblings needed help. This is what led to charges for Gerrit Jan van Dorsten, who was the supposed father, as well as for Josef Brunner, who was the tenant. Preliminary investigation revealed that the adult children were made to believe that they were the last humans on Earth. In the end, Garrett committed numerous unbelievable and horrific crimes and was charged with a multitude of them. Just last year, however, he was deemed unfit to stand trial, and it's not exactly clear where things will go from here. It's also apparently divided the children, as the oldest 4 were in support of the arrest, with the youngest 2 being against it. All in all, this is just a horrible situation, and I feel terribly for the ones involved. In our number 1 spot today, we have Esther Sturmer. In 1941, Esther Sturmer was living in a little Ukrainian village with her 6 children. They were one of the few Jewish families who lived in the village until late that year when Nazi forces came. Esther, along with her family and 36 of the other Jewish people from her village, were able to escape, and they then spent nearly a year and a half living underground in pitch black in 2 vast caves. The group found these deep underground caves that run for miles, and they lived down there for 500 days in total darkness, but they later said that for them, the caves provided them the freedom they were robbed of during the war. 2 of Esther's children 70 years later spoke about the entire thing and said, quote, "We had a very smart mother. If I wouldn't have had this type of mother, I wouldn't be alive." They also said, quote, "You went to sleep and you had a pillow and you covered up with good blankets. What else you want? You were in paradise." The families would forage for food at night, they built showers and latrines underground, and they lived like this until April of 1944, when the Russian army liberated the area and the 5 families were able to come back into the light of day. They survived, and the 2 sons said, "We were just happy to survive. Then life started to turn normal, and that's it. We tried to get ahead. We tried to survive after the war." Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have The Roommate. Linda Chase is a woman who lived quite an isolated life and didn't really see or speak to many people aside from her longtime friend and roommate Charles Ziegler. In 2010, Charles, who was in his 60s, ended up passing away from natural causes. Definitely a sad situation, but as is the circle of life, but rather than calling the proper people after Charles' death, Linda did nothing. Well, she put him in a chair and kept him there for the next 18 months. Linda decided she wanted to live with a corpse. Apparently she enjoyed the company and would speak to his remains while she watched NASCAR. In the end, Linda was also cashing his social security checks, which is both suspicious and fraud, and I believe that's actually how she was found out and caught. She swears that she didn't keep the body just for the checks, but rather because she didn't want to be alone, and while that is terribly sad, the jury is still out on that one. In our number 9 spot today, we have San Pedro. Okay, if you haven't heard of the San Pedro prison in Bolivia, do I have a story for you. This prison was made famous when a British inmate began giving tours of the prison to tourists in the early 2000s, which sounds kind of insane, but this prison is unlike any other that I've ever heard of. This prison is essentially run by the inmates, and it functions like its own little society. It's absolutely wild. It's more like a hotel than what many would consider a traditional jail. Inmates actually have to purchase their own cell, to which they get a key, and there are like nicer 5-star cells for the rich, and sometimes they even renovate them to make them nicer, but there are also smaller, more crammed cells that house more than a couple inmates. So like some cells go for $30,000 while others are just a couple hundred. So while this all may seem like a lax, fun sort of monopoly prison system, there are actually some major flaws with deadly consequences. The city in which San Pedro is built, La Paz, sits at about 3,600 meters above sea level. It's one of the highest cities in the world, and this means that at night the temperature drops rapidly, and if you're left without a cell, you might just die of exposure, as have many prisoners throughout the years. Along with the cost of a cell itself, inmates also have to pay for food, clothing, and medicine, so they need to have jobs within the prison to pay for all of this. You might be sitting there wondering what this all has to do with families that chose to stay in unsettling places, and really it's because at San Pedro, the government allows prisoners' wives and children to live with the inmates. I really did just say that. The children head off to school in the morning and return at night, and it is said that this is done so that the inmates don't lose contact with their families, and so that it can aid in their rehabilitation. The wives and children who reside at the prison are said to be treated with the utmost respect and are kept safe by all inmates, but despite that, it's of course an extremely controversial topic. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Danakil Depression. The Danakil Depression is a part of the Afar Triangle in Ethiopia, and it is a geological depression that came about as a result of Africa and Asia moving apart. The divergence of 3 tectonic plates caused rifting and volcanic activity. This place is the hottest on Earth in terms of average year-round temperatures, and it is also one of the lowest places on Earth at 100 meters below sea level. There are active volcanoes in the area, there are salt springs, sulfur springs, and it only gets about 4 to 8 inches of rain every year. What I'm saying is that this place is stunning, and it has an incredibly rich geological history, but it isn't very hospitable. Despite that, there are people who call this place home. The Afar people have called this area home for many years, and of course that poses the question of how? Well, the biggest industry in the Danakil Depression is salt, and many of the people who live here will mine salt with their hands and then take a 2-day camel journey into the next town to sell it. The people who live here also have to deal with an average temperature of 35 degrees Celsius, but sometimes it gets as hot as 50 degrees Celsius. Somehow they have overcome the odds and the obstacles and managed to thrive in this extreme environment, and it is said that this was made possible over the centuries by their ability to adapt to need less food and water than other humans. Honestly, it's one of the most remarkable things I've ever heard. And on number 7 spot today, we have the Ramsey home. Okay, what would you say if someone told you that they bought the home where a horrific and one of the most prolific crimes of all time happened? And then what if I told you that they went to sell it years later but decided against it because they just loved the home so much? I mean, I get it, but I don't. You know? This is what happened when Timothy and Carol Schuller Milner bought the Jean-Benet Ramsey home in 2004 after it had sat vacant since the terrible crime happened in 1996. The 7,000 square foot home was built in 1926, and after their 2004 purchase, the couple tried listing and selling the home at a price point of $2.3 million in 2008, 2009, and again in 2011, and once again in 2014 at a lower price of $1.95 million. But surprisingly, no one wants to buy it. I wonder why. Now the home is unavailable for purchase, but not because it was snatched up by someone, but because Carol and Timothy turned down all the offers because they simply love the house so much. In our number 6 spot today, we have La Rinconada. This town is located near the Peruvian Andes, very close to a gold mine, and is actually the highest permanent settlement in the world at 5,100 meters above sea level. Between 2001 and 2009, the population of this town increased greatly because the price of gold rose 235% during that time. Because of the elevation, the town has an alpine tundra climate and an average temperature of around 1 degree Celsius. The city has no running water or sewage, and the population of people who live here are working themselves to the bone in extremely dangerous mercury-filled mines. They're also working under some pretty horrible conditions where they work 25 days of the month for no pay at all, and then for 5 days of the month they can work for themselves and they are allowed to take as much ore as they can carry on their shoulders, but there is no guarantee that the ore will have any gold in it, and this is a terrible system, and it's why many of the town's residents live in extreme poverty. The town is a 6-hour bus ride from the nearest city on unpaved roads, and there isn't really a regular bus schedule, which makes it very difficult to get to. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Yukon Wilderness. Suzanne Crocker and her husband Gerard Parson packed up their lives along with their 3 children and set off to live for 9 months in a remote cabin in the Yukon Territory here in Canada. They lived with no running water, no electricity, no internet, and not even clocks or watches. They wanted to unplug in the most dramatic way possible. Suzanne said, quote, "To get the freedom of time again, we had to free ourselves from the structure of time and see what would happen." They actually made a film about this adventure called All the Time in the World, and it begins by showing their arrival to the cabin where they have to work for days in order to transport all their food. They have to haul it up a hill to the cabin, and then they have to build a food shed on stilts to prevent bears from reaching it. When the temperature temperatures plunged to minus 50 degrees Celsius and the nearby river froze solid, they described it as liberating, being able to skate, ski, and snowshoe freely. The coldest days they had a bit of cabin fever, but in the film, one of the children, Kate, makes a very beautiful point as to why, when the 8-year-old explains that, quote, "Inside is our storage place, but outside is actually our home." Half the days were spent preparing food, as quite literally everything needed to be made from scratch, of course, and all of this was only possible because both Suzanne and Gerard clearly had extensive knowledge of life in the wild. While this was certainly not an easy mission, there are definitely more unsettling places on this list, and as it turns out, this 9-month-long adventure turned out quite beautifully. In our number 4 spot today we have Volcanic Island. This is one that is very different from the others on this list, but it was just so incredibly interesting we have to talk about it. Back in 1965, Mano Tatao and 5 of his friends were studying at a boarding school in Tonga when they decided to do something quite rebellious, and that was to steal a traditional whaling boat and set off for Fiji. There are of course several flaws with this plan, but boys are boys, and they stole this engineless boat that had no map or compass, despite their destination being about 500 miles away. On the first night of this trip, a terrible storm ripped off the sails from the mast and tore off the boat's rudder, and for the next week the ship drifted aimlessly until the teens were able to struggle ashore to a volcanic island that they were able to spot. They were on the island of Ada and now had to learn how to survive. While many would expect some sort of Lord of the Flies situation, it was anything but that. The boys worked together to keep each other and themselves alive. Until they could build a fire, they ate raw fish. They would drink the blood and eggs of seabirds to keep their thirst quenched, and at one point they were able to find a clay pot, a machete, and some chickens that were left over from a small Tongan community that had lived here before. I could go on about this story forever, but in the end the boys lived quite harmoniously for 15 months while they were stranded on this island before they were rescued and brought back home, much to the astonishment of their families who had been grieving them for the last year. Despite how long it's been, many of the boys, who are of course now men, remain friends and sometimes even sail together. In our number 3 spot today we have the Versace Mansion. This place is an American property that was built in 1930 and is well known for being owned by Italian fashion designer Gianni Versace, as well as the place where Andrew Cunanan took Gianni's life. This 19,000 square foot Miami Beach home was bought by Gianni for $2.95 million in 1992, and in 1993 he also bought the adjoining Revere Hotel for $3.7 million, which he tore down to make the pool and garden area for his home. On July 15, 1997, Gianni was sadly shot by Andrew at the front of his home, and to this day, no one really knows why. Of course, when a tragedy occurs in a home like this one, it isn't exactly easy to sell after. In 2000, however, that all changed when Peter Lofton purchased the home for $19 million. Instead of using it for his own personal enjoyment, he decided to use the property as a boutique hotel, restaurant, and luxury event space. After that, in 2003, the mansion was bought by VM South Beach LLC for $41.5 million, and since then they have been using it as a luxury hotel with 10 unique suites. So yeah, not just one family is staying here, just a bunch of different rich ones are. In our number 2 spot today we have Centralia, Pennsylvania. This is a door to hell that is located in Pennsylvania underneath the cracked asphalt of one of the town's streets. Under these streets is an underground coal mine fire that was first set ablaze in 1962, and it just may continue burning for another couple hundred years, or maybe forever if it really is the entrance to hell. It is unknown exactly how the fire was first started, which is the topic of many arguments, but it quickly burned through all of the old networks of shafts and tunnels. After the fire started, sinkholes began to appear all over, and steam plumes, which were full of lethal amounts of carbon monoxide, began to rise from the ground. People started to compare what was going on underneath the city to what hell must be like, thus the Door to Hell name. Once 1984 rolled around, the government began urging people to leave the city and even claimed to help with the relocating costs, but as of 2013 there were 8 residents who refused to leave, and they ended up settling a lawsuit that included a $349,500 settlement and the right to reside in the town until the end of their lives. In our number 1 spot today we have the Dahmer home. Jeffrey Dahmer is of course one of the most terrifying and prolific serial killers ever, which is exactly why it doesn't come as a surprise that his home, the one where some of his very first crimes were carried out, was a bit of a tough sell. Yeah, turns out most people don't want it. How strange. PETA was going to use the property to convert it into a vegan restaurant, but because of zoning issues, that never happened, so they needed to look for someone else to purchase the property instead, and that ended up being Chris Butler, the rock musician from Waitresses. According to Chris, when he first viewed the home, he had no idea the dark history behind it. He was really intrigued in it because it is surrounded by woods, and as a rock musician, looking for somewhere you can make as much noise as you want without bothering anybody is ideal, but when you think of a serial killer owning it prior, that thought immediately gives you the shivers. In the end, he says he went with the house because he really liked it, and it's not like it's the house's fault for the atrocities Jeffrey committed, which, I mean, is fair. He also doesn't believe in ghosts, so he doesn't worry on that front. According to him, the only thing he really worries about in the home is all the people stopping by who want a tour like they're entitled to it.
Number 10. The Mars family. I want candy. You want candy. We all want candy. The Mars family owns Mars Inc., which is, and you guessed it, the Mars Bar Company. They are one of the world's largest candy and pet food companies, right? Like what? Like how do those go together? You know? Kinda weird. The family themselves come from humble beginnings. Frank Mars started Mars Inc. way back in 1911 when he started selling candy from his kitchen in Tacoma, Washington. The malt flavored nougat we all know and love wasn't actually made until 1929, when they came up with the Milky Way. How exactly they made the transition from candy to pet food is like beyond me, but that aspect of the biz expanded in 2017. They acquired the animal hospital company VCA, making a $9 billion investment. Overall, the company is worth, get ready, $40 billion in sales. What? So they're rich and they own candy? Well, okay, they're really rich and they own candy. For one, they can influence anyone. And consider the fact that sugar is considered an addictive substance. And then also, Willy Wonka, right? Fiction or non-fiction, candy is a big deal. Imagine a world without it. Number 9. The Morgans. The Morgans sound like the family that lives next door who outdo everyone when it comes to like holiday decorations, but I'm talking about the JP Morgans, who could probably do that and control the world at the same time. The Morgan family is one of the most influential American families. Their dynasty is tied to banking, and you have probably heard the name JP Morgan over like 100 times in passing. At the turn of the century, Morgan was the most influential businessman in America. He was so admired and respected that on the day of his funeral, the stock exchange remained closed until 12 p.m. To give you an idea about how much financial success he attained, he bailed out the US Treasury twice. His ability to do this no doubt caused great uneasiness among other people and resulted in the development of the reserve system in late 1913. Today, the Morgans still maintain their political and financial influence, not just in the US but also in Europe, as their company is there as well. So, world connections. Number 8. Pritzker. Arriving from Ukraine late in the 19th century, the Pritzker family made everyone believe that the American dream could be reality. 50 years into their journey as entrepreneurs, they finally started to invest in real estate. That one decision led to over 900 hotels the family owns today, plus an airline and a cruise line just for like extra pizzazz. Ever heard of the Hyatts? That's them. Like many on this list, they are not without shares in different financial institutions, amplifying their influence. After all, if you got your hands on someone else's money, well, you can pretty much do what you want. J.B. Pritzker was the governor of Illinois in 2019, so there's the political influence, and his sister Penny worked as the Secretary of Commerce in the Obama administration. So not only are they the 9th on the Forbes list of richest families, their political influence is even more obvious. Their net worth is over $32.5 billion, which they use to back the presidential campaigns of Obama and Hillary Clinton. An astounding amount of wealth, which of course has been met with competition and strife. Liesl Pritzker Simmons, once a child actress known for Little Princess, didn't know this, now a prominent impact investor, actually sued her own father along with her entire family in 2002. Her father and cousins looted her and her brother's trust funds, so she filed a $6 billion lawsuit, settling with $500 million plus $280 million in cash, plus more control over her trust valued at $170 million. So not quite the $6 billion she wanted, but still, no complaints, I would hope. no complaints. Number 7. The House of Windsor. Whether you consider them the figureheads of the monarchy, the House of Windsor remains one of the most powerful families in the world. They are the reigning family monarchy in Great Britain, and although they may not be the richest on this list, their wealth does not simply lie in money. The Windsors reigned over the entire British Empire, which of course included the fruits of the colonial pursuits of jolly old England from years past. Their colonies, protectorates, and dominion spread across the world. They were also recognized as the official monarchy of several independent countries. Therefore, their wealth is in many pies, as it were. Along with the fanfare that follows, people are obsessed with them. Like the whole Meghan Markle thing, it's nuts. Queen Elizabeth II is the head of the family, the church, and the commander-in-chief of Great Britain's military troops, along with performing her duties as supreme ruler of 15 autonomous countries. Fun fact, this is a fun fact, my grandparents met her twice at the Queen's garden party, and they said hi, and she's very queenly, and that was all I really found out about that. But that was cool. Number 6. Rockefeller. John Davidson Rockefeller may have picked up a few tricks from his dad when he started his American empire. Son of a con man, Rockefeller bought out several owners of Cleveland's largest oil refinery in 1865. Then he just kept going, buying out competitors left, right, and center, which led him to take over 90% of America's refineries and pipelines. But beneath all that success were dubious dealings with corporate spies, secret railroad deals, bribery, leading the US attorney to sue Standard Oil after this came to light. However, the trial only resulted in the company breaking off into 34 sub-companies and allowed Rockefeller to maintain ownership. By the time John D. died, his assets equaled out to 1.5% of America's total economic output. That's more than anybody has ever made today. Today, the 200 descendants of the Rockefeller family have a net worth of over $11 billion, which is significantly less than what they had before. Though their considerable wealth is not what it once was, their name still carries immense weight to this day. John's grandson, David Rockefeller, is the man who stirred up rumors of conspiracy in the 1950s due to his highly secretive meetings. His enigmatic behavior added to fuel to the fire towards the suspicion that the Rockefeller family seeks to gain or maintain control of the world. Number 5. The House of Saud. I feel like if you even have your baby toe dipped in oil somewhere in the world, in a metaphorical sense of course, you can control the world. It's the most important thing, we use it all the time. The House of Saud is the royal family of Saudi Arabia. They, like many powerful families on this list, have old money, especially since they are descendants of the founder of the first Saudi state. The king of Saudi Arabia reigns with absolute power, meaning he could make anything he want happen at the snap of his fingers. They could start a war if they wanted to, and that they have. They consider the country to be an asset, especially since they reign on precious crude oil reserves, about 20% of the world's global resources. The entire House of Saud has 15,000 members, so to be clear, we are specifically talking about the 2,000 members of the inner circle. The actual family under the king of Saudi Arabia can get any job they want so long as it's in the country. Number 4. The Bush family. Yup, we mean that one. Of course, you would expect the families on this list to have political connections, otherwise, how else would you rule the world? Their family has made it into the political offices for over 70 years, with good old G.W. Bush being the 43rd president. But of course, we must discuss a pretty seedy scandal. Documents finally declassified in 2003 revealed that Prescott Sheldon Bush had dealings with the German army during World War II. The Guardian reported in 2004 that Prescott worked for and profited from companies closely involved with the German businesses that financed the man who rhymes with Hitler's rise to power, meaning he could have been prosecuted for providing air and comfort to the enemy that killed millions of innocents. Additionally, this is crazy. Additionally, he continued his support after it was revealed what the Yahtzees were doing, and you know what I mean by Yahtzees, I just can't say it because YouTube, censorship. Ugh, I hate it. But anyways, the documents even imply that the US knew where the camps were and could have disabled them long before they were finally discovered. Number 3. Rothschild. The conspiracies surrounding this family appear to me never ending, and some of them may be right. After all, the possibilities are endless when you carry that much influence in your wallet. The Rothschilds are one of the most wealthy families in the world, and their legacy goes all the way back to the 17th century. That is the oldest money I think we have on this list. Mayor Amschel Rothschild established a banking business back then and became the personal banker for the German royal families. His 5 sons then took the business and expanded it into London, Paris, Frankfurt, Vienna, and Naples. British and French war efforts have relied relied on their funding, including the Napoleonic Wars in 1803 to 1815. This family literally had a hand in the success of war. If that's not power, then I don't know what is. Though their business remains in control of banking, they also have hands in real estate, oil, and construction, so basically everything around us. Number 2, the Murdochs. No, I'm not talking about the Canadian classic everybody watches on a Sunday that's been running forever, Murdoch Mysteries. How are ya? But same name. To say the media plays a huge role in every part of our lives is an understatement, even to say that. It's at the rate we consume media on our phones, on the subway, on the street, TV, computer, on headphones, you'd have to head to the Alaskan Triangle just to get away from it. Which is why the Murdochs are so damn powerful. The Murdochs control several broadcasting networks, their reach stretching across 3 continents. So needless to say, their influence has very little borders. Their imperialism began in Australia by a political reporter for the Melbourne papers, Keith Murdoch. Keith climbed his way up to editor, and after he figured out how to double the sales, he became CEO. His son Robert followed in his footsteps as a reporter, and together they formed the News Corporation, which held the power of Australia's media in the palm of their hands. But the corporation now owns 20th Century Fox, Fox News, MySpace, and Dow Jones, plus I think a few more. However, there is no fame without scandal. In 2011, the News Corp was prosecuted for illegal phone tapping of celebrities, the royal family, and even bribed police and special units. People thought that maybe, I don't know, like maybe this should topple the entire empire, but it didn't. It remains standing, and who knows what's happening behind the scenes. And last but not least, number 1, the Waltons. And hitting in at number 1 on the Forbes list of America's richest families, we have the Waltons. Their net worth being $247 billion. Fun fact, if you were to start counting to $1 billion today, it would take you 30 years to complete. So imagine counting to $247 billion. Somebody do the math for me down below in the comments. Guess what they own? Walmart, which is the world's largest retailer by sales. However, they also own Arvis Banks, right? Which operates 16 banks in Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Kansas. An unfathomable amount of wealth that this family hoards, and it looks like they want to keep it that way. The Waltons have played a lead role in eliminating the federal estate tax, which would essentially help billionaires evade estate tax entirely, right? Their influence also carries over easily into politics, considering the average election campaign costs $10 million. The Waltons could easily make that in under a day on their business earnings alone. According to Bloomberg, they can make around $100 million a day. Who do you think gets to dictate the terms when your candidate needs money? On top of that though, they also donate a lot of money towards education and environmental initiatives, and of course have their grand share of vintage cars, art, and properties. Apparently it still sucks to work at Walmart though, so.